My name's Ed Clark. I'm president of the Wildlife Center of Virginia, which is the facility where this bird has received its life-saving care. I've got a number of colleagues here. Amanda Nicholson's here, Dr. Kelly Knight is here, and who else is here? A number of our students are here. So hi students, they're soaking up knowledge like a sponge and learning how to care for wildlife. We've got, where'd Amber go? There she is, one of our former colleagues who was stolen away from us by the National Zoo, but now is enjoying life in Front Royal, so we're kind of in her neighborhood. But the Wildlife Center, before we start talking about this hawk specifically, the Wildlife Center of Virginia has been around for about 33 years now. We started in 1982, and we started as a local wildlife rehabilitation center down in Augusta County near Waynesboro. Started in a horse barn, but it didn't take very long for people to find us and more animals being brought to us. So our program grew. We outgrew the facility. We moved to Weir's Cave, Virginia, where we operated for 10 years out of a collection of double-wide and single-wide mobile homes. And then in 1995, we moved into our current state-of-the-art teaching hospital. Now, when I say teaching hospital, the Wildlife Center is not technically a wildlife rehabilitation center. We do wildlife rehabilitation, but we are a wildlife hospital. And that means that we have to meet certain legal and programmatic capabilities. We've got 4 licensed veterinarians on our staff. We have a team of about 20 people, veterinarians and wildlife rehabilitators, that care for somewhere between 2,700 and 3,000 animals a year. Now that sounds like a lot of animals, and it is a lot of animals. It's a lot of work, but there are a lot of facilities around that get a whole lot more patients than we do. And they are facilities that focus just on the animals and care for them and try to turn them loose, and that's fine. We certainly appreciate that and work with a lot of those centers, but our program and our goal is just a little bit different. We are also involved not only in finding out what's wrong with a specific animal, but finding out why it got hurt in the first place. So, and this particular bird is a wonderful example of how that works, and we'll talk about that a little more as we go along. But in addition to doing good work ourselves and caring for animals, a big part of our mission is teaching others. So the full mission of the Wildlife Center is teaching the world to care about and care for wildlife and the environment. Now that sounded, when we wrote it back in 1985, like a pretty ambitious undertaking, you know, teaching the world. Sure you are. You can't even teach everybody in Augusta County. Well, interestingly enough, today we have had, in the last number of years, we've had students from over 40 countries come and study at our facility in Waynesboro. We have donors, active contributors, in over 20 countries. And we have people following our webcams and Facebook pages and website from about 95% of the countries in the world. The last count, it was 196 nations and subdivisions of nations. You know, some nations have, you know, island nations in particular have a number of little independent subdivisions. They're all technically one nation. 196. And when I asked my colleague, Amanda Nicholson, who's our director of outreach, to send me the list, and she sent me a map, and there were 4 or 5 little clumps of white places on the map. I said, that's it? Those are the only countries that have followed us? She says, no, those are the only ones that haven't. Every place else, every country in South America, every country in Europe, we have regular followers. So when we say we are teaching the world, we mean it. And in fact, I've already worked in 5 different countries this year. So I'm getting ready to leave again to go back to Africa to do some training with the largest wildlife rehabilitation program in Johannesburg. So, and in fact, Dr. Knight, our Assistant Director of Veterinary Services, is coming along. She, in addition to being a licensed veterinarian, she's a certified wildlife rehabilitator, which is an international recognized credential, and she's an instructor with the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council. So we are going to take that training program, that officially sanctioned training program, to Africa to train people there And that particular little center gets 11,000 animals a year, just to give you an idea of the scope. So when we do the work, we're doing it, but we're learning from the animals for which we care, and then we're also training others in the process to go back to their own communities, go back to their own countries, back to their own universities or centers, and take what they've learned at the Wildlife Center and put it to work. So we're pretty proud of that. But interestingly enough, we are not your tax dollars at work. We are a nonprofit organization. We exist on contributions from the public. We get no government funding for general operations at all. So all of the animals for which we care, their care is provided by people who care about them. They have no health insurance. All right, now Kelly, why don't you and Amanda, if are you busy doing your thing?
Communicating with the online.
Okay, yeah, Amanda's our outreach director, so her job is to communicate what's going on to the world. So she's back there texting furiously, and there are people all over the country finding these messages and following right along. I mean, if you go to our Facebook page, you'll be seeing her comments, and you'll be seeing people following along, wanting to know exactly what's happening. And we're working on the technology to be able to actually stream a presentation like this and a release like we're about to do very quickly. Why don't you tell them about this bird?
Sure.
Now, again, Dr. Kelly Knight, she's the Assistant Director of Veterinary Services at the Wildlife Center.
So this was an adult female red-tailed hawk that was found down in a field, unable to fly, by a Good Samaritan. They called the Fort Valley Wildlife Center here locally, and Kurt went out to get this bird and was quickly able to pick it up, which is a bad sign. The bird was unable to move, unable to fly, had its feet clenched, and basically was just down and unable to do anything. He stabilized the bird, gave it some fluids, gave it some pain medication, called us, transported it to the Wildlife Center, and we did a complete physical exam. We did blood work, we did x-rays, we took, did everything we could to examine this hawk, and did a blood lead level because its symptoms were classic for lead poisoning. Down, unable to stand, clenched feet. So the lead level came back absolutely sky high through the roof, one of the highest levels I've ever seen, 4.6 parts per million. This really is a level that should have killed this bird. Very few animals are going to be able to survive with a lead level that high. It can cause permanent damage, including blindness. So we did immediately start chelation therapy. That is how we treat lead poisoning. We give a medication called calcium EDTA. And what that does is the EDTA that's normally bound to the calcium, once it gets in the blood, it drops the calcium and it binds the lead. And so now you have the EDTA in the lead, which takes it out of the blood and just is released in the urine, so that then the lead is removed from the bloodstream. So it was a really long touch and go process with this bird. It had to go through multiple rounds of chelation therapy to try to get the blood lead levels down. And then once that even started happening, a long road of physical therapy to allow this bird to recover. This bird's feet were so tightly clenched that its talons were actually hurting itself. So we had to put bandages on the bird, ball bandages, to basically give it like a stress ball to grab onto to keep it from injuring itself. So eventually those feeling in its toes started coming back, and then movement in the toes started coming back. Eventually was able to stand. We're talking months here. This bird came in January. So finally around March, we were able to get this bird outside, and then had a very long road to recovery, flight conditioning and training and reworking all those muscles. Imagine being in a hospital bed and not able to move for several months, and then the long process of recovery. So this patient is really a miracle. Can't believe it's actually alive and recovered, but it's here with us today, 7 months later.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Yep.
And indeed, as I mentioned earlier, we talked about the notion of when a patient comes in, fixing the patient is important, but sometimes it's not the most important thing. And in this case, this particular bird is suffering from something we are seeing increasingly, or detecting increasingly, and that is lead poisoning in raptors and scavenging birds, and it is coming from the ingestion of lead shot and bullet fragments. Now, I'm a lifelong gun owner and lifelong shooter and hunter, and I never ever want to kill anything that is not my intended quarry if I happen to be a hunter, but we didn't know that this was going on. People will say, oh, well, why all of a sudden we've been using lead bullets for 400 years, how come now it's just starting to be a problem? It's not now just starting to be a problem. It's always been a problem. What's new is the desktop technology with which we can do the analysis of the blood, and in about 90 seconds, with about a drop of blood, we can find out why the bird was poisoned, because you have to respond to poisoning differently based on the poison. And in this case, lead poisoning is not just a problem for wildlife, it's also a problem for people. In this country, we had the big battle over lead content in paint, which was causing children to have brain injuries, slow development, neurologic problems. We have found lead in gasoline causing health problems for humans. It's removed now. We have found that lead shot was killing waterfowl because it was all shot over wetland areas, and the ducks would go along and filter the bottom for food, and they'd pick up this shot and swallow it to help their digestive process. Well, it is in the digestive process that the lead breaks down. So if a bird has been shot and has a BB in its wing, it may survive and do just fine. But if it swallows that BB-sized piece of lead, or a grain of lead the size of a grain of rice, that's enough to kill an eagle in 48 to 72 hours.
Is there any sort of specific types of animals, game birds, squirrels, deer, that y'all believe that the red tails are feeding on, which they're getting the most of this lead from?
Well, you never know. It's all speculation. Based on the natural history of red-tailed hawks and the fact that this bird came in January, and with lead levels that high, this bird either ate an animal that had been shot and not recovered, or was scavenging almost certainly on a deer pile. And people will say, oh, well, I'm a deer hunter, but I use a jacketed bullet, and it goes in one side and out the other, so there's no problem. Well, there is a problem, because it goes in one side weighing 180 grains, it comes out the other side weighing 140 grains. And that means that all of that lead dissipates in the body, and well documented, well established. And the good news is, we don't need any new laws, we just need people to buy non-lead bullets.
Sounds like a good case for bow hunting.
Well, there you go, good case for bow hunting. I'm not here to advocate that today, but I am practicing. But the fact is that it's a good case for non-lead ammunition for people who wish to hunt. And there's now full range of non-lead ammunition for muzzle loaders, for rifles, for shotguns. And while everybody was complaining about it because it's a change, the ballistics experts are finding that actually a copper rifle bullet is more effective and more stable over long distances than a lead bullet. And partly because it keeps its weight. The weight doesn't break off. It continues to do what it's there to do. Now, over the last 5 years, just to give you an idea, this is not just about red-tailed hawks. This hawk is such a miracle that we decided to have a public release today because it is such a special story. But in the last 5 years, we've gotten in, 33 or 34 bald eagles that had lead as a primary or secondary cause of admission. So sometimes they're hit by a car, and then when we test them, they were eating roadkill because their systems are off because they were previously poisoned. So their primary reason to come in is they've been hit by a car. The secondary reason is they've also got lead poisoning, even though lead poisoning was first. So, but we've had, I think the numbers I looked at last night, 33 bald eagles since 2011. 29 of those did not survive the experience to be returned to the wild. So this is a big deal. And this is an animal that makes it to the world's best wildlife hospital. And still, 29 out of 33 did not survive. So in the wild, if people don't find them, if people don't bring them in, if people like Kurt out there are not willing to go get them when it's inconvenient to do so, the chances of their survival is very, very, very low. And every single one of those was entirely preventable. simply by making a different choice about the hunting ammunition. So we're not bad-mouthing hunters. We did not have the evidence until the last few years, and now it's a matter of getting the word out. So, shall we do a little flipping the bird? But one of the reasons we're here and bringing her back and sharing this with all of you, this is a miracle bird. This is a bird that should not have survived based on the levels of that heavy metal toxin in her blood. But her will to live just gave us the will to keep working on it. She's looking at something up there.
Yeah.
All right, 1, 2, 3.